Okay, so you might remember from a few videos back we talked about this AST Bravo MSP75, and here's the actual CPU that was in the machine. It's the P75 Pentium. So one of the things I mentioned in that video was the fact that the motherboards on a lot of the Pentium machines will support 5 volt, or they will go up to the 3.3 or 3.6 volt. So we knew them as the 5 volt CPUs and the 3 volt CPUs, even if they are a little bit below or a little bit above that. So what I was saying in that video was that we could also upgrade a motherboard that supported the later MMX chips with a 3 volt CPU. So this one here is in the 3 volt range. That was in the 3 volt range, which means we can actually just literally drop that CPU in here and get MMX technology in this motherboard and also improve the speed of the machine. This will do a few things. The machine itself seems to be capable enough, but the CPU is basically holding it back. So if we install that CPU, it will allow us to have those MMX extensions and gives a little bit more play with the old 3D. The other little thing about it is that it's better to have a little bit more speed than to have not enough of it, because you can always throttle back the speed, but you can't increase the speed if you haven't got enough. On a Pentium class machine like this as well, it's going to be very restricted in what you can do graphics card wise, etc, etc. I suppose what we could do is we could drop in something like a Voodoo card into here, but as I said before, it's probably not really worth that. It's probably better to upgrade this video card to something a little bit beefier than the 3D versions in at the moment. I'm nearly sure that I had some ATI Verge cards that were PCI, but I can't find them at the moment. I'm sure I had a few of them knocking about, but I just can't find them. I don't know where they are. They all seem to be AGP. I had a good look in the box that I have, and I have AGPs and all sorts of stuff, but no PCI ATI cards with the 3D accelerator on them. Maybe they didn't exist, but I thought I had some. I definitely have one. What's it? An ATI 3D Rage Wonder card. I definitely have one of them, but that's got a fault on it that basically only displays green on the screen. I think it was some memory issue that caused a backfire on it somewhere. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So let's continue. Say for a moment that the motherboard doesn't tell you directly whether it will support the 3 volt CPU. How can you find out? Well, take out the old CPU. And thankfully, for the wonder of the internet, what you can do is you can type in that number at the top. See this number here? And basically, if you type that in, this A01, if you type that in, it'll basically list up that CPU on the CPU museum most likely, and it will then allow you to read the specifications of that CPU. And if it says in the 3 volt range, then this MX chip, which is also in the 3 volt range, will allow you to run without any issues. Well, the eagle-eyed among you may notice that this CPU is actually a 133, as it says at the very end there. So somewhere along the way it's been upgraded, and I think I did that. But where the original 75 CPU is anybody's guess. I probably upgraded it just to upgrade it and give it a bit more speed. So there's probably a good chance that I could change the jumper settings and give it more speed. But anyway, let's not do that. So let's get back to where we were. Okay, so when we look at the CPU World website, it tells us that the core voltage of this is basically 3.3. So it'll take any voltage from the 3.1 up to the 3.6. So that means that this CPU here on the right will work as a drop-in replacement. Now, one thing we've got to make sure of when we do that is we have heatsink installed, because what you can't do is just basically install these CPUs naked. But we also have a little connector on the motherboard that allows us to put a little pin header on for our CPU fan, so we can also use that. From the AST Research Bravo MSP75 book of information, it says we'll take a processor of 75, 90, 100, 120, 133, 150 or 166. So I was right in thinking that the 166 would be the maximum speed that this motherboard would support. You could put in a faster CPU, but because the frontside bus multiplier can't be changed to accommodate the faster CPU speed, you're wasting your time. So 166 would be the fastest, and that's what we're going to try to do at the minute. So when it comes to adding the thermal paste, just add a little blob. The idea of thermal paste, so just a little blob, look. It's probably even too much. Just a little blob. The idea behind the thermal paste is to basically allow, tiny little bit more maybe, just to cover the whole thing. Yeah. So the idea is that you want to have the thermal paste making contact with the surface top of the CPU and with the pad underneath. of the actual CPU cooler. So that's what you're trying to do. So try to spread it about there as best you can. And that's more than enough. That's more than enough on there. Tiny little blob is all you need, and just make sure it's spread around nicely. So basically it's to fill up any gaps that may be present between the CPU and the CPU cooling unit itself. So that's what you're trying to cover up. Okay, so we have a cooler here. So here's our cheap ass cooler with our little connector on. So we're going to connect that in there first of all. Oh, that's actually very fancy cooling thing. Look at that. Got 4 pins on. They were thinking forward in AST then, weren't they? Tell you, very forward thinking company. This isn't going to work, is it? I need a better fan. And I haven't got one down here. That's ironic. Okay, we'll use this fella. So we'll use one that's powered up straight to it. So it doesn't really matter that much, I suppose. Okay, so we'll go and put the CPU cover fan on. See if we can... probably should have took all these cables away to begin with, shouldn't we? That probably would have been the wise decision. The other problem here is there's not much space there to get that in there. Do you know that? We're very tight on space. I've got to see if I can push that down there. It's very tight. I'll have to lift it into my face, literally. But I'll see if I can grab that. Okay, well, I have to admit that that was not pretty. But it's on, so that's the main thing. So, yeah, just a very tight squeeze between the edge of the clip and these little jumpers here. I had to kind of kick them over, but just to try get them out of the way a little bit. But yeah, we're in. So let's hope this one spins after all that. So yeah. Okay, so this is a standard Molex type of CPU. The CPU isn't going to have any sort of variable speed anyway. So I don't think we're really losing any sort of gains. So I'm just going to take out the... Just going to move it over there and have a look. So I'm taking the power supply cable out of the back of the CD-ROM drive, which is extremely tight. Okie dokie, she's out. So here's the connection. So that goes in the back of there now. And what you do then is basically you're connecting that into that. So now it's powering the CPU power, CPU fan power that is, and the fan of the back of the CD-ROM drive. You might notice actually I've also upgraded the hard drive cable in here to the connector 80 cable I was telling you about before. So if you're upgrading or changing any of these old machines, go ahead and change that to that new type cable. Won't do any harm. As a matter of fact, your hard drive may run a little bit better. You never know. Worth a shot. But I got a shoehorn back in the graphics card here now as well. So not graphics card, the network card. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to basically turn on the machine and see if we get a large explosion or the machine actually now runs. So let's see what happens. Okay, so it's jammed, is it? No. After a couple of minutes, it decided to display what I thought the CPU was running at. So it's reading it alright as a 74.5 megahertz CPU. So we've really got to find out how to change the jumpers in this motherboard and try to get that a little bit faster, because we're basically losing half the horses here. So that's never good. So I'm going to just basically put that on there. Go down to number 18, which is there. And there we are. Number 18 is now closed with a brand new jumper. Basically has to be closed in position 1 and 2. So jumper 3 is this top one on the list. And there goes the jumper. It's gone. Let's get another one. So jumper number 3 is the top one up here. Case, there's actually a number 1 on the board, screen printed on. So that's number 1 over there. So now we have position 1 and 2 closed on number 3. So we mark that off our list. So there's no more in this area here, because we're looking for position E11, E10, E8 and E6. So number 10 is closed, which is correct. We've got to get it closed for number 11. So we get another one of those white jumpers. If you just pick one out of the box. That's ridiculous. Can't seem to get it up. The jumper, that is. So that's the jumper out of the box. So now we're looking at E11, which is here, and E11 says it should be closed. So I'm going to do it with the pliers, because that way at least you can see it. So E11, That's E11 closed. And so E10, E20 and E11, which are all in this area here, are all closed. So we're going to close the last one here. So that's actually 10. So 10, this is 10, 20, 10 and 11. Now that's closed. So we can mark them off our list. So all we're looking for now is jumper E8 and jumper E6. So let's find out where they are and we'll change them. Having a look there, it starts with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So number 8 is the last one on the list, and number 8 needs to be removed. Now, you don't throw this in the bin. What you do is you basically put it back on the board, but you leave it in an open position. That way, if you need to change something later on, you can change it back. Okay, so it's in an open position now. That's the open position. Once it's hanging off, it's open. So now this motherboard should still turn on. We should be going into Windows. It probably still won't detect the MX technology, but the CPU should be jumping from a 75 to a 166, which will make a difference. Okay, so although it doesn't detect it as an MMX CPU, it is now detecting it as a 166 MHz CPU, all due to the fact that I upgraded from DirectX 6 to DirectX 7. So our CPU is now reading as a 166, so that's definitely a marked improvement. So let's see what makes any difference to the Direct 3D here. So that's the software being rendered, with the 166 CPU being the brains behind the operation. And that's with hardware acceleration. So there you are.